Hey everyone, welcome to part 9 of my Sequelize tutorial series, where now we're going to be going over raw queries and cool things such as SQL injection and how to prevent them. So sometimes we might actually want to write our own SQL query using Sequelize functions. So we can write a custom SQL query and then execute it through Sequelize using the query function. Specifically, so let me show you down here, we use our Sequelize instance and then the method .query. And what this function does is it returns an array containing two things. The first is the results of the query, and the second is an object containing metadata, such as the amount of affected rows, if it is something like an update statement. So let's do our own statement right here. Let's do update our users table. We're going to set the age equal to 54, where the username equals... Actually, I like surrounding it in this so I can use those single quotes. So let's get rid of this. And let's do where username equals, and then let's go into our table. Let's see a username we can update. So let's do WittCode, W-I-T-T-C-O. So where username equals WittCode. Awesome. And then because it returns a promise, so let's do return. And then we're going to, as I said, it returns two things. So the first thing is the results, or the result of the query, and the second is an object containing metadata. So I'm going to make an array here called result and then metadata, and this is just deconstruction. So because it returns an array, we are going to be parsing it and getting the first thing into a variable called result and the second into something called metadata. And then let's log the result and let's log the metadata and let's see what we get. So if I run this, we get an error, which is sequelize.video.users does not exist. User, oh, we did, this is because of course we did freeze table name to be true. So it's going to be this up here, user. So we don't want to specify our table users, we want to use our table user. Let's try this again. And there we go. So you can see we get a result set header object and another result set header, rows matched, serving status, and you can just see it logged both of those. And so you may have also noticed that these two are the same. So I know I said this is the result and this is metadata, but because this is a raw query, the metadata is specific to the dialect you are using. Dialect meaning Postgres or MySQL. Of course, we're using MySQL. And so, for example, some dialects return the metadata within the results object, and others, specifically MS SQL and MySQL, return two references to the same object. And this is why we are getting the same results printed twice. And then, as with most functions in Sequelize, the query argument here accepts argument, or the query function here accepts arguments. And one of these arguments tells Sequelize how to format the results. So for example, if in a simple select query where no rows are affected, you would just want the results of the query and not the metadata. So to do this, we would do the following. So let's just say we want to do a simple select all from user like this. We can specify that this is a select statement by passing in an object as a second argument and then the key type, and then we do query types dot select. So this is saying this is going to be a select statement, and so there's not going to be any metadata. So let's just log this to show you. This will probably be a bit of a big return because there's a few users in there now. And so you can see we got two users, and the reason is because we are it's returning an array of users and we're destructuring it still and just getting the first and second element. So that was confusing me, but that is why that is happening. So we just need, if we just log, say, our data like this, you can see now we get every single user. So we get a lot of them here, and you can see the statement run, select all from user, and this is the array. So, and it doesn't return any metadata, so you can see we just get an array of objects. We don't get a second argument because we are typing in here the type that it's a select statement. And so of course there are other query types. So for example, we could say this is going to be an update, and then let's say update our user table. Let's set age equal to, I don't know, let's do 100, where username equals WittCode. So let's do something like that. Let's see what data we get if it's an update. So we run this, we get undefined and 1. So this is essentially saying one of our rows was updated. It didn't return the actual row. I believe it does if you're using Postgres, for example, but with MySQL, it doesn't. This would be the actual row, but it doesn't return it. But let's go and now check. It said it updated one row, and now we got our age here, WittCode, to be 100. So that's just another cool thing if you specialize query types and update in here. And so another option that we can pass in here is the model. So if we pass this, then the return data will be instances of that provided model. Or in other words, there will be rows that contain the appended information that Sequelize tags on. And so, of course, to do this, we just type in model, and then our model for us is it called users or user? We have user, so it's singular, and it's called user. So if we do this, and let's not do an update, let's just do a select statement, select all from user, and let's do a limit. Let's do limit 2. Let's see what the data looks like then. So now if we log this out, you can see we get all that appended information, is new record, and all that stuff. So we can, of course, do because it's an array, we won't be able to do that. But, we can do the .2JSON that we've been doing throughout the series and things like that. So it's returning them as instances or basically rows of our table. And so, of course, there are some other options that we can pass as well. For example, we can set the key plain to true, which will make it return only one record. So I can post a link in the description about all these keys and stuff, but so we can set plain to true and see how we got an array returned here. Let's run it again. I think it probably just tags on a limit 1. No, it doesn't. It just makes it so it returns one value. And you can see now we only have one user object. So that's another cool key we can use. Now, another interesting thing we can do with this is we can create a custom logging function to determine how the data is logged into the console. It's easier for me to show you this with an example, but so let's just create a function, call it my function, and then I'm just going to do log, in all caps, running SQL statement like this. And then for our query, what we can just pass in here is the key, now I'm still in all caps, logging, and then if we pass in a reference to the function, so a reference to my function, when it runs this, we should see this logged into the console. So let's run this, and scroll up, and you can see we have running SQL statement. So that's just a way if you want some extra information about what you're actually doing, or something like that. Now, before we go any further, I want to talk about SQL injection. So SQL injection is the placement of malicious code in SQL statements through web page input. This injected SQL code will then be executed on your database, and it can be detrimental, such as dropping tables, impersonating users, and much more. And SQL injection is one of the most common web hacking techniques and consistently ranks in the OWASP top 10 for web application security risks. SQL injection usually happens when a web application asks for user input, such as a user's username, but instead of providing a username, the user provides an SQL statement that will be executed on your database. And I've actually got a really cool live example that I can show you all of this. So let me pull that up real quick. So what I have made is, let me show you right here. I've made this little web form here that is vulnerable to SQL injection. So what it is, it's made with a happy backend server. I've got a tutorial series if you want to learn about that. But also I've got, it's connected to Sequelize. So you can see I'm just have a little module here where I export my Sequelize instance. But basically all you need to understand is we have a login form that sends the username and password to this Sequelize query, so the query function that we've been using. And it just selects the username from users where basically the username that the user typed in here and the password they typed in here match something in this database here of these users. And if there is a match, then what it does is, so the results.length is not equal to 0, it will redirect you to the login page. So let's show you just how this works. So one of the users is WittCode. Let's say I get the password wrong, so I just use subs and do this, you can see we just get redirected back here. If I get the password correct, and then I say, like it's subscribe, and we log in, you can see we get the key, or we get the message that we're logged in. And so now let's go to the back, but let's see what happens if we do some SQL injection. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some SQL injection by using this here. You'll see it in a second, or space equals, which is a little thing that should actually be able to allow us to log in, even though we don't have a correct username and password. So let's see what happens if I type in this. You can see we're logged in, and yet nowhere in here is there a username or password with that, because this, we are using this Sequelize, where is it? The Sequelize query here, and we are just allowing any kind of input to go in. So you can see what it returned actually was everyone. So it returned everyone from the database, so the results.length was not equal to 0, and that's why we were redirected to the login page. Because you can see here what it's actually, where username is blank or equals, and basically or equals is always true, so it'll return everything. And so now I'm just going to show you ways to defend against this with Sequelize. So this is a good time to start talking about replacements. Replacements are essentially placeholders for dynamic information to be passed. And so the way to use these in Sequelize is we will replace whatever is here with a question mark. So we can just replace question mark, and Sequelize will place the data in here. And to actually do this though, we have to use the key replacements. So as a second argument to our query function, we'll do a comma and we'll pass an object, and we use the key replacements like this. Then what we pass in is the username and the password, which of course are what the user has entered. And so now if we go back in, I'll explain why this works in a second. But if we go back in and we type in our SQL injection again, and then of course put it in this one as well, and we run this, you can see that we don't get logged in this time. And this, if we go and look at our actual SQL statement that was made, you can see that the characters were escaped. So this is the reason it didn't allow us to log in with this SQL injection, because replacements are escaped by Sequelize, which avoids the main culprit with SQL injection, which is unescaped strings. And escaping a string essentially means adding a slash before the quotes so that they don't end the string. They are instead included in the string itself. So we are actually including these quotes that we were inserting, or where's our form again? The quotes that we were inserting when we were doing or like this, we're ending the string and stuff like that, but Sequelize will include this in the username essentially, or in the password. But so anyway, let's go back into our original program here, because I want to show you a few more options and ways you can use replacements. So we previously passed replacements as an array. So if we go back in here, you can see we passed them as an array for username and password. But we can also pass these replacements as an object. And this is done with a colon and then the key as opposed to a question mark. So say in here we do, let's do a select all from user, say where username equals colon username, like this. And then within our options, of course, let me make a new line here. We can put in replacements. I think I spelled that right. And then we can actually pass in the username we want to here. So the same way we did in our form. So let me check a username that we actually have. So it's not this anymore, but it is Sequelize video. If I select all, I think it's just called user in this. So let's go from here. Let's select all where username is, let's just do Mike. So let me go in here where username is Mike. And then if we do, let's run this. And you can see we have everything out here. Of course, it's listed as a text row and everything. So let me change it to just be a plain object by passing in the key, as you saw maybe in a earlier video. If we just do plain as true, let's run this again. And now you can see we just have them as regular objects. You can see we get Mike right here. Or sorry, not only doesn't make it just a regular object, but also just returns one object. And then of course we can also pass an array. So say we don't want to say where username equals, but say we want to do something where username is in username, which essentially means username is one of the lists that we provide in here. And so then in here, we can provide to the username key an array. Let's do Mike. I think we also have WittCode. Let's get rid of this plain actually, but let's just run this. Okay, and so you can see we get Mike, we get 3 mics, we get 1 WittCode, 4 mics. There are a lot of mics in here, but so you can see what we chose. What the actual statement is select all from user where username in, Mike, and WittCode. So that's another cool thing we can do. And something also that is useful in SQL is the WildCard operator in a replacement. So for example, we could search for a username that is something like, say we do where username not in, but like username. So like whatever here, of course, is going to be placed here, where username is like, and then let's do for our replacements, we'll do the key username, and let's just do WITT, and then like this. So wildcard operator, so it's basically saying starts with WITT and ends with whatever. So let's see what this would be like. We run this. Should give WittCode, I think that's the only one. So we get username Witt, we have a Witt, and we have a WittCode. Cool, and of course it's actually, the reason it's logging duplicates is because here, remember how it returns the results and metadata. So we can deconstruct it here, but of course, because it's Sequelize, or MySQL, it's only going to return, it's just going to return results and metadata here will be the same. Whereas if you're using Postgres, for example, this would be the metadata, but I believe MySQL does not have that. So now let's run it. We shouldn't be seeing those duplicates anymore. Yeah, so we have WittCode and we have Witt like this. And now back to talking about SQL injection real quick. So we saw one way to prevent it, which was escaping input. However, we can also use bind parameters to protect us even further. And bind parameters provide more security because they send the SQL statement and data to the database server separately. So even if an SQL statement is provided into the prepared statement, it will be treated as data and not actually executed. And bind parameters are referred to by $signs. So let me actually go into, we're going to be working with our SQL injection form again. Let me close this out as well. But so for bind parameters, what we pass is for replacements, we pass replacements. For bind parameters, we pass bind, and of course we can pass an array if there are multiple of them, but then what we do for these is instead of a question mark, we pass in $signs. So say we have an array, well the first one will be $1, not $0 like arrays are like, 0, 1, 2 for indexes. For bind parameters, $1 will be the first element in the array. And then of course we do $2 as well. So this will be the second. And that is because this is going to be our username and password here. So if we save this, and then let's try our login form again. And we do our little SQL injection code here. Paste into this. We should get rejected. So yep, you can see once again we weren't logged in. And let's go look at what the data looks like now in the console. So now you can see it even has select all from username where, and it just has 2 question marks. So you can see that the data isn't actually even in the query. And on the other hand, of course, we can also do an object. So with an array, if we wanted to do, say, username, we could do, or the keys down here, if we wanted to pass in an object, say like username and password, which will be these here, then we can just specify those over here. So then instead of $2, I would just do $password. And now, if we run this again, you can see we have no errors. And let's just run it. Let's just run it the same way we did last time. So go in here, refresh this page, and let's run this again. And if you go and check within here, you can see once again the data doesn't even show up in here. Now, a final note is that it should be noted that the array or object passed to bind must contain all bound values or Sequelize will throw an exception. So for example, here we have username and we also have password, so these need to be included here. And this also applies to cases where the database may ignore the bound parameter. And then another note is that bind parameters cannot be SQL keywords, table, or column names. So in here, these cannot be SQL keywords, just select. They can't be table or column names either. And also, if you're using PostgreSQL, you might need to actually typecast the input. For example, if you're putting a number, but you want it as a character, you might have to explicitly cast it. Say we have like username, you might have to do username varchar or something like that. And then the last thing I want to mention about bind parameters is if you have a column name or something with actually a dollar in it. So for example, our $username, maybe it has a dollar in it. And of course, if we're referencing username in an object here, we use the $sign. Well, if we want the $sign included, we just escape it by using a second $sign. So we would just add another one like this, and then just run it, and it would be the same thing. But so this is my video on raw queries and SQL injection with Sequelize. In the next video, we're going to be going over paranoid tables. So that'll be something that's interesting to go over. And then after that, I believe we'll be learning about associations. So until then, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.